Star Trek V failed because it took the wrong lessons from the Voyage home. When Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home hit theaters in 1986, it was nothing short of a cultural phenomenon. Audiences who had never watched a single episode of the original series flocked to the movie, delighted by its humor, fish-out-of-water scenarios, and a lighthearted message about saving the whales. The movie was funny, charming, accessible, and ended up being a financial triumph for Paramount. Naturally, studio executives, Leonard Nimoy, who directed The Voyage Home, and William Shatner, who negotiated to direct the next entry, all saw the film's success as a signpost pointing the franchise in a new direction. Unfortunately, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, released in 1989, demonstrated that Hollywood took all the wrong lessons from The Voyage Home. Instead of recognizing that the movie's heart lay in its characters, sincerity, and clever use of humor, The Final Frontier doubled down on surface-level comedy, unfocused spectacle, and a muddled attempt at profundity. The result was a film widely considered the weakest of the Star Trek movies. But how did the franchise misread its own success? Let's break it down. The Voyage Home, a perfect balance. Part of what made The Voyage Home so special is that it didn't feel like a typical Star Trek movie, and yet it stayed true to the spirit of the series. Rather than pitting the Enterprise crew against a mustache-twirling villain, the movie presented them with a problem that was both absurd and profoundly human. Humpback whales, extinct in the 23rd century, were needed to communicate with an alien probe that threatened Earth. The only solution? Travel back to 1986 San Francisco and bring the whales to the future. This setup gave the cast fertile ground to explore character-driven comedy. Kirk trying to explain Spock's behavior to passersby, Chekhov's nuclear vessel's routine, Scotty attempting to talk to a computer by speaking into a mouse, McCoy's horrified reaction to 20th century medicine, all of these moments were funny without making the characters seem stupid. The humor sprang from cultural contrast, not mockery. At the same time, The Voyage Home carried a serious message about environmental responsibility threaded into the story with just enough weight to give the comedy gravitas. This combination, sincerity, comedy, and character, was lightning in a bottle. It made the movie a crowd pleaser that resonated beyond Trekkies, proving Star Trek could have broad appeal without sacrificing its essence. The wrong lessons? Hollywood, though, is notorious for misunderstanding why something works. To Paramount, the big takeaway from The Voyage Home wasn't authentic characters with a dash of comedy can bring mass appeal. Instead, the lesson seemed to be audiences love Star Trek when it's a comedy. Enter The Final Frontier. With William Shatner at the helm as director and star, and with Paramount eager to replicate the success of Nimoy's installment, the movie leaned hard into jokes, slapstick, and buddy movie antics. Unfortunately, these moments often came at the expense of character integrity. Take Scotty, a brilliant engineer who saved the ship countless times. In The Final Frontier, he smacks his head on a bulkhead in a scene that plays like an outtake from a sitcom. Or Uhura, reduced to performing an awkward fan dance distraction sequence that remains one of the franchise's most ridiculed moments. Even Spock, usually the paragon of Vulcan logic, was shoehorned into slapstick gags involving jet boots and awkward quips. The comedy wasn't character-driven, it was forced, broad, and often undercut the dignity of the very crew audiences had loved for decades. The misguided quest for profundity, where The Voyage Home had an environmental message that naturally grew out of the plot, The Final Frontier attempted to tackle nothing less than the meaning of God, faith, and human longing. In theory, this could have been fascinating territory. Star Trek has always grappled with philosophical questions, often challenging dogma while exploring humanity's thirst for transcendence. But in practice, The Final Frontier handled the subject clumsily. The film's central figure, Sibik, is Spock's long-lost half-brother who rejects logic in favor of emotion. He commandeers the Enterprise to take it to the center of the galaxy, where he believes he will find God. Instead, the crew discovers an alien entity imprisoned on a planet, using Sibok's zealotry to manipulate him. The problem wasn't the premise, it was the execution. Unlike previous Star Trek stories that tackled big questions through allegory, The Final Frontier tried to literalize God as a villain. The movie even gave us the infamous line, "What does God need with a starship?" which became less a profound challenge to faith than a punchline signaling the collapse of the film's ambitions. What might have been a thoughtful exploration of belief ended up feeling confused, preachy, and half-baked. The tonal whiplash between slapstick comedy and theological musings only exacerbated the problem. Budget woes and creative overreach, adding to the missteps, was the film's troubled production. William Shatner, who had never directed a feature film before, had enormous ambition for The Final Frontier. His initial concept involved epic visuals of rock creatures, sweeping cosmic vistas, and a climactic battle of biblical proportions. Unfortunately, budget cuts and rushed production schedules crippled those ambitions. Instead of awe-inspiring cosmic spectacle, audiences got rubbery alien costumes, unconvincing effects, and awkward action sequences. The ending, meant to be a grand revelation, looked cheap and anticlimactic. Where the Voyage home cleverly used its contemporary setting to save money shooting in San Francisco rather than building elaborate sets, The Final Frontier overextended itself, trying to portray the ineffable on a shoestring budget. The result was a movie that looked small when it needed to feel big, and cartoonish when it needed to feel serious. Character dynamics done wrong. Another lesson The Voyage home demonstrated was the power of ensemble chemistry. Every member of the crew got a moment to shine, often in ways that revealed something new about their personalities. By contrast, The Final Frontier often sidelined the supporting cast, reducing them to comic relief or awkward side quests. The heart of the movie was supposed to be the trinity of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and while their campfire scenes remained some of the film's best moments, the balance was lost elsewhere. The wider crew, once celebrated for their contributions, became caricatures. It was as though the filmmakers forgot that part of Star Trek's appeal lies in teamwork, the idea that every character matters. The franchise recovers. The backlash to The Final Frontier was swift. Fans and critics panned it, and it underperformed at the box office, making it one of the lowest-grossing Star Trek films. For a while, the future of the franchise seemed uncertain. But then came Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, directed once again by Nicholas Meyer, the Wrath of Khan. That film steered the ship back on course by blending political intrigue, Cold War allegory, and sharp character work. It proved that audiences didn't want Star Trek to be a broad comedy or a muddled sermon. They wanted stories with intelligence, tension, and heart. In many ways, The Final Frontier's failure was a necessary correction. It reminded the franchise what Star Trek truly was and wasn't. A real lesson. Looking back, the contrast between The Voyage home and The Final Frontier is striking. One succeeded because it remained rooted in character, sincerity, and accessible themes. The other failed because it misread humor as the franchise's new identity and overreached in its